And the only way you can get a bunch of people with a bunch of big egos and big titles aligned is to have them think bigger.
The people that can solve the biggest problems are usually the ones that get paid the most and also the ones that are changing the world.
And the reality is I've been in and out of 500 different organizations, and there's not one of them that's not completely marked with flaws.
All right, so I am joined with Aaron Bear, and I'm really excited to have you out here. You came out here before, you talked about your book, The Exponential Theory, and today what I want to jump into is a lot about where the world's at and about the ways that we think, because so often we think that everything in our life is about our education, about our experiences, about our background. And yes, I think those things matter. We talked about it before, about your education, but really one of the things you're known for, the reason that companies like, Google, and you've got, the list of the companies that you've been hired on to consult with, they hire you for one major reason, and that's the way you think. These companies have access to AI, they have access to so many different tools, and yet they still bring you on. Why do you think that is?
Well, we're in an exponential age. I wrote a book about it, and you realize that humans are only limited to the capacity of what they think they are. And we can really break this down to how humans vibrate on this planet, because we're all vibrating. We're all, when we think about the quantum realm, what you want to do is get to a place where you understand the impact you can make, and you're very responsible with that. You're very conscious of that. And I think exponential theory was the goal to prove that. And I went and studied all these exponential leaders and spent lots and lots of time with them and studying their organizations, their impact on organizations, people that directly reported to them. People that worked with Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. And you talk about the greatest leaders that have made the biggest impact because they're technology companies was really because of how they enabled other people around them. I've taken that same mental models, those same first principles, and I can take any kind of, problem and break it down and start to build it up, leveraging the resources in the best way possible. And I think that's where you can take some of the smartest people, but then their ego gets in the way. So what you have to do is realize is that the higher somebody gets in life, sometimes they start to lose the edge because they're no longer thinking from the place that got them there. And Einstein has a great quote that you can no longer solve the same problems with the same thinking. And I think that's my ability to come in from a different perspective, provide a different strategy so that people think bigger about themselves within their organization, think bigger about their career, think bigger about their impact, think about legacy. So every little decision they make starts to become part of a bigger system. And I think it's oftentimes that you want to manage the system, not necessarily the individual people, and you'll get the greatest outcome from that. So a lot of times we're kind of caught up in what we do when we realize that the system that we're in is really dictating our behavior. Sometimes you got to take a step back and say, how do I reinvent this system? And I think we're going through a massive transformation in the world right now to kind of take a step back and say, how do we actually do this? And artificial intelligence is doing that for good and bad, meaning that it's not necessarily people could implement all the artificial intelligence they want, and they'll probably get rid of all their low value activities, and then their people will stop thinking, and then all of a sudden their companies will die. So AI could very much, people could implement it very fast, but literally chase that to the bottom. There's other companies that'll enable them to think about the highest value activities. And I work with a company called Baryons AI, and I think of it as like the iPhone moment that I wrote in Exponential Theory is there's before the iPhone and after the iPhone. And we know that there's definitively a different world because of that smartphone. I think we're at an AI moment where there's before AI and after AI. The company I'm working with and the strategy that we're kind of developing, I have this mindset that's before Baryons and after Baryons. And Baryons is this idea that you have an AI mentor, mentoring AI. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But once you reduce the number of hours you spend on meetings and email and these different things, you have to have a mentor to replace that with high-value activity so that you start to think bigger. That's been my specialty. So that gives a huge differentiator for us because there's unlimited mentorship in ChatGPT doesn't necessarily say that it's going to apply that knowledge, meaning we have infinite knowledge now. We don't have to know things, but we have to have the wisdom to how to apply those.
Right. Yeah. AI is, you and I could geek out about this for a long time because, since we last talked, you have, you started investing into AI companies and you've started to see what is happening here. And, I've been on my own journey, as you know, with our company Pono to be able to figure out exactly what this process is going to be. And just the amount of information, the amount of the way that these LLM models have been able to change and move and recreate themselves and program. And I've never seen anything faster in any kind of technology in my life. It has been incredible to watch. But with a lot of the people that are right now, they have businesses, they're running organizations, or they're thinking about running an organization, or even people are at home thinking like, hey, I have a problem, right? So there's a problem. I would like to know kind of how you think through things. So when a company like a Google or someone comes to you and they say, hey, we're going to bring you in to consult for us because we have some of the biggest problems and we're not sure how to solve those problems, because the people that can solve the biggest problems are usually the ones that get paid the most and also the ones that are changing the world. I think every single major leader in the planet, especially if you look at organizations, companies, government, and so on, majority of the time, they're really good at this technique, and that is solving big problems and thinking differently than I would say everybody around them.
Yeah, so let me give you a little history of me to get to where I'm at and to how I think is. I was trained as a facilitator. To facilitate in Latin means to make easy. So if you're going to go into an organization, you have to make solving a big problem easy. Well, it's not my knowledge set to go into a company. I don't know the intricacies of that company or the culture or the barriers or the constraints or whatever it is. But my talent has been in to go in and facilitate a conversation amongst all the people that have knowledge, expertise about their company. The problem is they're not all on the same page. So to facilitate, to make that easy, is to get them aligned, to get them, and the only way you can get a bunch of people with a bunch of big egos and big titles aligned is to have them think bigger. And you have to get them outside of whatever constraints that they have on themselves. And somewhere in some spiritual, subconscious way, I can go into a room and pick out the empathy of the room and kind of feel the room. And this is where it's not brain power. It literally is just being connected to people in that room, pulling out the introverts, making sure that different people offer different insights at different places so that the conversation continue to flow and build on each other. I create some ground rules. I do some different things. But I've been in rooms with board of directors at Daimler, Coca-Cola, Belfius Bank in Belgium, MNC Saatchi in Australia. And I've literally seen this transformation is when you start to see people align and build on each other, you start to create momentum to think bigger. And once you get people thinking bigger than whatever is, because we are all just the status quo. At the end of the day, we regress to the mean. The Hermetic law, one of the laws is the law of rhythm. And the rhythm means that everything kind of comes back to the mean, the average of what it is. Well, when you start applying that to a board of directors, you generally have a group of people that have been very accomplished in whatever they do, but they're very set in the ways they do it. Today's world, and where I think my expertise has come in, is I think like a child and I play. I come in, I don't pretend I have the answer, and I actually make all of them play so they get outside of their ego and dream a little bit of what they could do if they had no constraints. Because constraints are just bound by your own neuroplasticity, by your own 5 closest friends, by your own vision of yourself. All those different things play into who you are. And, once you get past those, now you start to see other people's perspectives. Now you start to grow and learn. You get into flow. You can get into deep work. You start understanding that everything's just energy and frequency. And then my goal is just to come into a room and raise the frequency. If they're in anger and upset and all that, I have to get them to the next stage of really just being able to talk to each other. That's easy to do when you think bigger. The more you think bigger, and it gets up to love, when you start seeing people like expressing gratitude and empathy and love for each other, that's a place in a senior leadership team which they've never felt before. But the reason they get that is because they start being them authentic selves, because they're playing like they are a child. They may even shared a story. I'll get them to share stories about some pivotal moment in their life that they literally made something up about themselves. And realizing at that point, when they share that, everyone in that room looks at that person differently. Because I find that we don't fall in love with perfection. We fall in love with flaws. And the reality is I've been in and out of 500 different organizations, and there's not one of them that's not completely marked with flaws of individuals, of systems, of all the things, of even business models, everything you think of could be broken, and the power of the people will hold it together. Once you start actually having them think bigger, they can solve the system first, which I think is one of those critical things, is to go in, figure out what's wrong with the system. Because a good friend of mine, Derek Maines, shared this with me, is that 94% of problems in a corporation are of systems, 6% of people. And when you think about that, a lot of people, Gallup would say 85% of people only quit because of their manager. Well, they quit because of their manager, because the manager is literally just applying the rules that the system has put on them. And then maybe some personality and different things. But the reality, if the system were engaged in a way that people could redevelop the system and be part of implementing a new system, and this is what I do with companies, is that we break down the process so that you can streamline it, so that people understand what happens in the system and they understand their role in it. And once they understand their expertise in that and that everyone else is relying on them, literally magic happens. And it doesn't matter what size of company, what level of company, every team organization needs to work on this forever. They're never, ever there. But you solve the biggest problem first, and then you kind of move down the list and solve smaller and smaller problems. That then changes an organization, because now you're communicating, you're winning. And I have a rule of there's no failure. You just win or learn. And when you're winning, it's great. When you're learning, it's even better, because all of a sudden you're not making those same mistakes again. And mistakes can be very costly as long as you don't make them again.
Right. Yeah. That concept of that we're either winning or we're learning. And then the fact of saying even when we're learning, it's even better, right? Because we're not going to continue to make those mistakes. What are some questions that you would say that you ask yourself, though, to tap into that, tap into that space of thinking bigger?
Well, part of the learning part that you just said, why it's so important, why learning is more important than winning, is because winning feels good, but we don't really learn much from it. But when we learn something, if everybody in a group learns it, you just solved exponentially potential issues for the future. The fact is if we don't celebrate, the fact that you learn, and we actually put failure into an organization, which is part of the problem with most organizations, like so-and-so failed, let's penalize them. What you've done is taught everybody in the organization not to take any risk or not to do anything wrong. You paralyzed them, but you also didn't teach the lesson of what they learned to all the other people. So just the fact of facilitating that, being in a room and being able to see that, and then actually opening people up and seeing and really stopping people from like putting negative things on learning. The fact is we're all here as human beings to learn and grow. And I think that is to get to this my next book, One Extraordinary Habit, is to learn and grow to be authentically confident in whatever area of your life, whether it's mental, physical, emotional, relational, spiritual, or financial. That growth of being authentically confident in that area. It's hard to measure what authenticity is. It actually is a frequency that you can measure. It's hard to measure confidence. When you cross-section authentic and confidence, you can start to create a number that you can be subjective to other people, authentic confidence. That then gives yourself a score that you need to compete against yourself to find yourself at a higher level. When you get 12 or 15 people on a senior leadership team all thinking that way, that they contribute their authentic confidence to the organization, you now have like literally an organization that's exponential because everybody's moving in the same direction. Once you start moving a group in the same direction, you separate out that most organizations have about 15 to 20% of the people that do all the work at the top and 15 to 20% of the people that actually like detract from that work. And you got the people in the middle just confused, and that's generally your masses. If you can actually lop off the bottom, these people start to look to how to do the work, and the organization starts to move very, very quick. I think what we're seeing now in the world, in the government and different things, DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency, used to be a joke of mine. I was like, the future, the government's going to have to be efficient. And then people will be like, well, why? Because there's no longer we can do this forever and sustain this. And now we're seeing the government being efficient. And part of that is really just to segment out, how do you find the people that are actually doing the work, the ones that are all on board? There's probably some people that are a little skeptical of things going on. There's the people that are resistant. And then there's people that are literally working against the system. Well, what you have to do is find the people working against the system. So, one of the things that Elon Musk is doing is he sent out some emails, and we're seeing a lot of news about this because employees are feeling uncomfortable with this. But if you really look at it from a systemic approach and really from the strategies that I use facilitating, What he's identifying is he'll reset people's passwords, see if anybody even logs into what they need to log in to do. Okay, now if they haven't logged in a month, then they're really stealing dollars from the government, from our taxpayers. So that's your people working against the system. There's probably people that won't respond to an email, like you'll send an email and say, give me the 5 things you're working on. There's people who won't respond. We know that those aren't going to benefit the system. There's people that are somewhat on the board that'll take a little time to respond, or they'll respond partially or not, like certainly. And then there's people that are absolutely say, these are the 5 things I'm doing, and they immediately respond because they know that that's their responsibilities and that's what they're doing. You now have literally a look at the system, and you realize it's like, oh, okay, well, we could get rid of these people pretty easily because they haven't even logged into their system, or they're logging in from the Bahamas, which means they might have fraudulent, taking paychecks fraudulently, or, you have people down in the system that eventually will never respond and are really not even considered going back to work. So when you start to build that out, you start to see a bigger picture about the system itself, and you start to see, how can I make this more efficient? One, it starts with, how do you treat the people? You've got to get a baseline of how the people think about the system itself. If they take advantage of it, you got to identify that. This is the easiest, fastest way. It's crude, it's hard, and the reality is, I have a friend that's a governor, and, he said it best. He's like, once if you want to survive everything that's going on in government right now, so if any of your listeners have friends and family that are in government, is just comply. Comply as much as possible to understand that what we're looking for is loyalty to the mission, to the cause, because that's never been asked for government employees, because we're all patriots because we work for the government. But what we realize is that in any organization, people are not going to come to work for free. So if you stop paying them, they'll stop working. So as much as you think you're doing a great thing and they like you and they love you, they're going to go home if you don't pay them. So we're going to keep paying the people that come and work, but you realize is like you can identify the people that really do the work. Then you can actually kind of start to feel how the system works itself. Then you can start rebuilding it.
And it's such a unique way of thinking about things. And what I've noticed about you is that you're always constantly studying, you're learning, you're growing, like all the time. Like since I saw you last, again, some of the things that you're speaking about today, I'm like, man, how do you get so much done? And when you had you on the show last time, one of the things that I recall is you were talking about how when you were younger, right, when you were in college, how you went off and you sat with these individuals and you showed them a phone, right? You were telling me that experience, and then they had you walk into a tent and you smoked out of this ox bone, right? And since I talked to you last, you told me that recently, though, you did something completely different that made you even think even more different out in I believe it was out in California, correct? Joshua Tree, yeah.
Yeah. So I went on an ayahuasca journey over the new year with a girlfriend, and
first time, correct?
First time, yeah. And part of your own, personal journey. I mean, it's not for everybody. I don't want to say that, but people that are curious about it should explore plant medicine. It's a natural process, and obviously, it's this was a Native American ceremony that really put me in a place where I could think bigger about myself. So part of my own, I wrote a book about thinking big. I've gone into companies thinking big. And what ended up happening to me is I just laughed and I realized like all the things like kept popping up, and it's kind of my life's purpose is to help those around me think bigger and make a bigger impact. And I laughed at all the things that were small. And I started to realize like all the things I had to shed to even think bigger. And I think that's part of my own journey of unleashing myself on the world to say, how can I make the biggest impact? It's sharing these conversations to hopefully inspire other people to really think bigger about themselves. Because like I said before, you're only your own constraints that you put on yourself. You are a box, and your limitations are set by yourself. You can expand that box as big as you wanted to expand it, and people are going to think you're crazy. And honestly, there are people that think I'm crazy. And guess what? They're just not ready for what I'm thinking.
Yeah, because you're talking a lot about, when we talk about vibration and frequency, most people don't even understand what that means. Earlier, talking about that we can measure the frequency of love, confidence, we can look at all these things from such a different perspective. And it does sound, from the outside perspective, it does sound a bit crazy. And so does, obviously, sitting down with these natives and having this conversation with, Mother Ayahuasca and going through this whole experience. And even when I told you before, I was like, man, you really ought to, this is such a beautiful, amazing experience. What were the things you had to shed to think bigger? Like, that's such an interesting way of looking at things, because it's often our belief systems, it's often our thoughts, it's often like our experiences, our past and so forth that hold us back from thinking as big as we can be. And this is your role. Like, this is the role that this is your mantra, like think big. And now here comes this experience where you're like, now I need to figure out what I need to let go of to even think bigger. What was that?
Well, I mean, and I actually came up with this scale and this process, and I would take it back to ayahuasca. But as I come out of that, I realized that the one extraordinary habit that we have in life is to be authentically confident. And if you're that, and I'll give you a couple different examples and kind of share how I thought bigger about it. But for mentally, it's clear that I think big. I go into organizations to help them think bigger. Physically, over the last 5 years, I've shed 100 pounds, put on muscle, really thought bigger about myself. I wasn't authentically confident when I started, if you think about it on a scale. At times I had disgust, I had anger, I had all these different emotions, which then just fed into me not being healthy. When I started to vibrate at a higher level, one, I shed the fact that I was an imposter in the gym. And now people started to look to me to ask me to help them because I had proper technique, because I went enough, I did enough repetitions. And you either learn something that because you have a dramatic emotional experience from something, which I did, one, I went through a divorce, or two, you go through enough repetition. And that's where physically I transformed dramatically. And probably it's the biggest dramatic transition that people can see that know me. And I'm growing younger. And now I'm involved. I won the X Prize in 2020. I'm involved in an X Prize now for HealthSpan, $101 million X Prize. I got a team with the governor of Puerto Rico, the president to be, CEO to be at Vail Health, the CEO at Energy for Life, the CEO of Viome. We put together a group of some of the smartest thinkers in the health span space. And here's me that 5 years ago weighed 317 pounds. In that, because of my vibration and because of me pulling forward, I was able to attract some things in my life, some people at different periods. And I was just conscious enough to be aware that they were there to guide me, just as Mother Ayahuasca was there to guide me. So it doesn't mean that you have to go do plant medicine. You can actually do it on your own. I think that may accelerate some people's, accelerated mine. But during that journey, I started to realize is that life is unfolding in front of me, and I get to choose how I want to take my path. And that free will that I have said, I want to think bigger. I want to impact more people. That led me here today. We are always exactly where we are supposed to be because we made every choice and decision to be here today. This will lead to something else bigger. I mean, probably from a conversation earlier, it'll lead to different things. From one of your listeners, it'll lead to different things. I'm open to whatever opportunities come to me because I see that I have a role to play that can impact anybody that crosses my path, including anybody that listens to this podcast. So I do comedy. Part of that is on a scale of authentic confidence is that I'm working up that. So now just like I've become authentically confident physically, mentally, now emotionally, you want to get authentically confident, go do stand-up comedy.
No, I'll bet.
Because on that journey, you can go from, I was always a good keynote speaker, very highly rated keynote speaker. I've been a facilitator. Facilitating is a really hard task to be in front of a bunch of different people that all want to take shots at you at the same time because you're pushing them to think bigger themselves, to getting into improv where you're literally acting something out in front of people, to really stand-up comedy. Those are all areas to be authentically confident in the master of communication. So you can take this idea and you have a scale of everything, you can find the same scale and you realize that vibrations of very low vibrating people, and the reality, if you just want to break down this one extraordinary habit that I'm writing this book about, you realize that you want to hang around people that have higher vibrations. You want people to feel good. So you want to look at your 5 closest friends and see who vibrates higher than me, who vibrates lower than me. And that's an easy thing to do. We all can make an intuition, our gut instinct, our source will tell us who vibrates higher or lower. And we'll be able to actually have a conversation and whether we can figure out, do we all go on this journey? It's the idea if someone's a drinker and their 5 closest friends drink at the bar every Friday night, they can probably say, I'm going to quit drinking for about 3 weeks. On the fourth week, they're going to be sitting at the end of the bar because they missed their 5 friends. Now, if all 5 of them commit to saying, I don't want to drink every night, or I don't want to drink on Friday nights, now their percentage of luck or success, or just, not necessarily luck, but their success goes up exponentially. And that's where, when you realize you have to sometimes move away from the people that are holding you back to vibrate at the level that you want to do. I've shedded that through many things. Part of my laughter, to come back to ayahuasca, part of the shedding is shedding the people who I thought I was, and that it was important for me to be that, and important how people think about me. There comes a place that I don't care what anybody thinks about me. I personally don't even, like, I've had people say crazy things to me, and I'm literally like, my reflection is like, that's a reflection of them, not me. At the end of the day, if you know me and you know my intent and you know my goal in life, then you start to like, okay, I want to be around that vibration. If not, then you're probably not going to be around me.
So you have the change makers, right? We've talked about this before. And would you say the majority of the companies that you consult with, that you invest into, that you sit on the board for, that you own shares in, is that getting you closer to your goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody that's attracted to me is willing to make changes. It comes really quick that, if you're resistant and stuck in your stuff, and the Change Agents Academy, which has now become the Extraordinary Community, we changed the name because even though people said they wanted to be change agents, which is the idea they can impact the world and go through this process, we realized that only about 30% of the people completed the program, which is actually a really high percentage comparative to other education systems like this. Nonetheless, people are resistant to change. So what I wanted to be is more aspirational. The reality is nobody wants to be ordinary, but all reality is almost everybody's ordinary. We want to be extraordinary. And what's interesting about being authentically confident in an area, it's the ordinary everyday task of me working out and me eating the right things, me taking, the right walks, getting in sunshine, hot, cold plunge, red light therapy, every different little biohack you can think of. Those ordinary tasks, if you do enough of those, you have extraordinary physical performance. Where I'm competing against 25-year-olds in the gym to see who can do the ski erg the fastest or who's going to go on the rowing machine the fastest. Like, I'm pushing myself to its limit because I have no limitations on that. There's a lot of other people that we see this with Tom Brady and Steve Nash and all these older athletes. You're realizing that you can do things longer because your mind can tell you can. That's authentic confidence in yourself.
How do you cultivate that?
So part of that is our extraordinary community is guided all around this idea that you find the repetitive tasks, the habits, and that habit is just raising your frequency on every one of these areas. So every day, my goal is to focus on the biggest problem in whatever area that I'm on. So for fitness, it's whatever it is, I'm going to focus on it and be 1% better. Now, if I do that every day, it's really hard to do that every day, but in 1 year, I'll be 37x better. I may have some setbacks. In all reality, I may have some days that I gain 5% better. And that's just a mental game that you play with yourself to kind of continue.
Do you play that game in every component in your life?
Yeah, life's a game.
Yeah, so
if I'm in a boardroom,
you're measuring everything all the time.
Subconsciously. I'm not driving myself crazy. My mind's very quiet. And I think that takes some time. For a long time, I did measure that. At the beginning, what happens is when you're authentically confident, you just do it. Take Tom Brady as an example. When, he had a very regimented schedule, he didn't think about it. It was automatic. It was he got to the place where it was part of his automatic nervous system. He wasn't thinking about what he needed to do, but he wasn't doing anything to be detrimental to himself. The same thing as you think of an organization, and I shared before, is like you look at a company, you got to get rid of the stuff that's holding you back. The same with, I have this idea of immunovation that I've shared with you is that, just like the earth is an immune system or your body's an immune system, is white blood cells, when they find something wrong, they like holler down and say, come solve this problem with me. Same with stem cells. We talked about stem cells. It's like you can solve problems in your body, but you have to take care of your whole system. There's no use to kind of go do one therapy if you're not literally take care of yourself.
Yet stem cells, when we were talking earlier about stem cells, you had said that you're doing consulting for a company and they have amazing stem cells, right? Then you also told me there's another company out there that they do ayahuasca retreats, they do plant medicines and so on. And you said even though that their stem cells are not the same quality, that they have a better, I guess you would say, better efficacy. Yes.
Yeah. So
why?
What's interesting, and this is where it led me to my plant journey on ayahuasca, is when you hear this study, and the one company that has better stem cells is like, hey, we have quality stem cells of, say, 95% alive when they go intravenous, and that's just a quality measure. And then they look at their competitors and they measured them all and they realized that this one competitor had 5%. So you effectively have almost a 20 times greater potential with this one. But these stem cells at the other institution that was lower quality, because they were doing psilocybin and ayahuasca, either or, and then they would go do this, the plant medicine opened up, and this gets, out there a little bit, would open up your cells. And if you think about immunovation is when I'm plugging stem cells into me, if I plug them in and then the next day I go and drink, and this is what I say about not taking care of the whole system, all the stem cells are just put in me. I could put $50,000 of stem cells into me. And if I go out and have a bender, all those stem cells go to my liver to say, I got to solve this problem. And this is where you realize is like, you are an ecosystem. You are your world. If you go to this plant medicine where you go in, all of a sudden you take stem cells, they're not as effective on a laboratory ranking. But you have ayahuasca, what happens is the stem cells in your body are more communicative with the new stem cells to say, come on in, let's solve some problems. Versus stem cells that go in and you're not in an ayahuasca or plant medicine, literally they go around and everybody's like rejecting them. So even though they're more effective, it's kind of like the U.S. Army versus Mexico. I guess it's an analogy, is you would think who's going to win that war. But at the end of the day, if they get so much resistance, you can wear down the bigger one. The smaller one, if there's no resistance, you're going to get something that happens really good for the person. And that is where the idea of immunovation comes, is if you want really good innovation, think about how the immune system works. And if you're very open to changing, if your mindset's open, and this goes to like the number one thing for success in anything is mindset. In fact, the gold standard of all medicine is gauged at 2% greater than the placebo effect. So if you think about placebo effect, that's just mindset. So if I believe the stem cells are going to be effective, which on ayahuasca, I believe they're greater effective, then they become more effective.
Well, it's because, I don't know this, but when you're purging and letting go of all of these emotions, these feelings and so on, at that point in time, your body is open, which then tells me that your cells are open, which tells me that your mind is open to receive and open to new ideas and concepts and even a level of rebirth. But I had never thought about the fact that when you're putting in stem cells, when the cells are open, when the body is communicating and saying, yep, come on in. Like, we could definitely use this nutrition. It could help us. We could grow. Like, we were really open, that it would have a better effect. Then it makes me go like, okay, well, if these stem cells over here are not as good, we'll say the efficacy of them, and these ones are excellent, then what happens if we take excellent stem cells and put them into the body?
Well, presumably it would have that much greater of an impact. So
you would think so.
Yeah, that's not their business models, but that
of course
should be or could be their future business model, because, as we kind of look to the future and we introduce plant medicines back into the regimen, meaning 50 years ago, pharmaceutical kind of shut that down. I'll give you another one. I don't know if, then this goes back to frequencies. Rife, are you familiar with Rife frequencies? Mm-hmm. Okay, so over 100 years ago, Rife frequencies came about. Pharmaceutical companies shut that down. We're now actually seeing a lot of proof of Rife frequencies come back into the world, that everything vibrates at a frequency. And this goes back to my authentic confidence. And when you learn that every disease state, every different thing in your body, every organ has a frequency because it's all vibrating, and you can tune into that, and you can tune a frequency into that, you start to be able to heal it and balance it or kill it. And those right frequencies are able to kind of counterbalance that. We're starting to learn with frequencies that we've known for over 100 years, just like plant medicines we've known for 50 years. We're starting to say, the synthetic drugs that the pharmaceutical companies and the synthetic food that the big food companies have come, so big food and big pharma have come about and literally created these, institutions that have guarded their best interest, which is meaning I come up with a pill that solves or basically creates, may mask a problem. And an example is we have a fever, and the first thing that we do as Americans, and not all around the world do this, is we go get aspirin or Advil to counterbalance the fever. Well, what do you think the body's thinking? The fever is a good thing because it's there to protect you. It's there to burn out what you're supposed to burn out. Like Native American Indians will go out by a fire and bury themselves on the ground and ground themselves and wake up the next morning completely fine. If you go use frequencies, you can actually counterbalance that same idea, because we're all just talking about frequencies. The earth has a frequency of 7.83. That is a grounding. That is something that we miss. There's tons of documentaries and different things that prove this. Is we don't walk around with our bare feet anymore. We have rubber on our feet. When we walked around with bare feet, and you see these crazy people that do that,
I know them.
Just know that they're doing that for a reason, because that's solving the inflammation in their body and everything, because the earth is a healing mechanism. We're all an ecosystem. We're all connected to it. And that's why we need to do better for ourselves and for earth so that we can take care of future generations.
How do you think that we can start to think bigger about spirituality, psychedelics? Like, what are we missing in this conversation, do you think? Because now that you've had these experiences, you think in a large ecosystem when it comes to business. Let's move outside of business and let's start to look at human consciousness and what are we not seeing, and how do the listeners, how the viewers start to think bigger? What questions do they ask themselves to get out of this sheeple type experience, right? Where they're following everybody else by their belief systems and letting them think for themselves. Even those people are never going to do psychedelics.
So let me bring one point to closure, and then I'll come back to getting people to think about themselves and be critical thinkers, because we are in a world that doesn't critically think because there's so much information. We just believe it. And we think everyone's an expert and we trust it. Not a good thing. Trust but verify is what any expert that's out there, Joe Rogan says it. He's like, you trust but verify something I said. He's like, I definitely gave bad information during COVID. Trust but verify. I literally got famous by feeding bugs to people on a reality TV show. So the reality is you become an expert because people give you that status. We have to trust ourselves and our gut and our instinct. And we have to get back to actually not thinking, because overthinking is what hurts us the most. And a study that kind of makes this point is at Vail Health. I'm on the board of the Behavioral Health Hospital, and they're using hot cold therapy, and they're doing psilocybin trials, and they're working through government to do this. They've even used ketamine and some different things. There's some issues with obviously federal funding and things, so they have to do it in a different entity, and that's all broken out. What they've proved, though, is hot and cold therapy can literally solve depression at a higher rate. They've proved that psilocybin can increase that even more. So you start to kind of see that what we've said is behavioral health, which if we're all have a behavioral health issue, it all goes back to my one extraordinary habit. Behavioral health issues only happen down here at the bottom when you're vibrating at a very low level. So if I can actually help you get out of that vibration in any way, and hot and cold therapy is not good for everybody. In fact, if you're having stresses of paying your bills month to month, your rent, that stress is a bad stress. A good stress is cold therapy that releases cold stress proteins, hot stress proteins with sauna. You can go back and forth and do that. If you have bad stress and you add these to it, they become worse stresses because you're really just stressing the body, and the nervous system can't handle it. So you have to be in the right place, and that's where your vibration, you have to know where to introduce these different things as you vibrate at a higher level. And that all has been kind of proven out through sciences. And that's why I say there's only one habit in this world, and it's to vibrate at a higher level. And when I say vibrate, that means to be authentically confident in every area of your life. So now you take it back to your thinking, like where we were talking about before. If people are stuck in the victim mentality, and that is that life happens to me, because a lot of people say life happens to me. They have no free will or control over it. But that's the reflection of their own mind. And the world, you're a reflection of me. The world's a reflection of me, my environment. I could say this is the most beautiful studio in the world. I could also say the opposite. I'm going to choose that this is a beautiful studio. And that's going to serve me better, to give me a better experience. But many people are on that scale somewhere thinking something different, looking for something that bothers them because that's their norm. Whatever your norm is doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. It just means that you'll always find your way back to it. So what you have to do is raise that vibration so your norm raises, so your expectations raise yourself. All of a sudden, when you see people who are extraordinary or excellent or doing incredible things, it's because they're confident. It's because they're authentic in any area of their life, whatever you think of. And it's embracing every one of these journeys. Why my ayahuasca was so successful? Because I went into it saying it was going to be successful. Just like the stem cells go into someone's body and they're more open, when I go in my mind to any situation, whether I'm walking into a boardroom or on a stage somewhere or whatever, I'm not nervous. I'm literally getting into my authentic confidence. I'm saying, how do I share the best version of myself? Like we come into this conversation and I just want to give as much information as quickly as possible in the most efficient manner possible. And I hope to do that. And I feel confident in that. And now every time I do that, and I'll give you another little thing that people say affirmations don't work. And an affirmation is like, I am this, I am that, which is a low level affirmation. On your chakra level, I am is the lowest level. When you start saying, I know this is going to happen. When I say, and I said to you this earlier today, I know that baryons is going to be a unicorn.
Right.
It feels different. It's a different frequency. I just talked from my crown chakra, not my root chakra. So now you get into the woo-woo world and you start to actually say, oh my God, there's a business application to this. I go into a boardroom and I have this conversation and it kind of comes back to spiritual capitalism. Capitalism is an incredible thing. There's no other system that can be better than that. Can we add more consciousness and spirituality to it? 100%. That's the bridge that I'm gapping. But I literally have a science that I can tell you that frequency, one extraordinary habit, as I escalate people one step at a time, I know they're going to make a bigger impact on their team, their partners, their kids. I know that slowly is going to happen. Whether they like me or not doesn't matter. It's that I'm being authentic. You know, Robert Cialdini's powers of influence are the first two are liking and authenticity. And at the end of the day, authenticity trumps out. You don't have to like someone. No pun intended on Trump, but you go down there and then you have social proof, consistency, reciprocity, contrast, and scarcity. You can funnel anybody through that process in a business, which is when I go into businesses, I say, how do I create a funnel? Because your purpose matters. How do I get people moving through that? Well, I have you to be your highest level of authenticity. You'll attract the most customers that are attracted to you. I don't talk about it in this way. I'm only talking about it this way in this podcast because it's about spiritual capitalism.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, if I can help you find your purpose and I can help that nothing else matters but that, and that's your highest value activity, I can then eliminate all your low value activities. Now I keep you out of here. But if your life happens to you, what you want to do, you're very fragile. You have to become vulnerable to understand that you're fragile. Once you're vulnerable, then you can become resilient. Most people think resilient is good enough. You really want to be anti-fragile. So Elon Musk, coming back full circle to Elon, he literally teaches anti-fragility at his school, Ad Astra, at SpaceX employees take. It's one of the biggest concepts he sends, anti-fragility. So when people attack him, it gives him energy to get the things done he wants to do. The rest of the world might shut down when they get attacked. But when you're authentically confident, knowing where you want to go, and you know it's the right thing, and you trust your gut, and you're spiritually aligned with it, you're literally vibrating at this level. Do you think it matters if someone says you made a salute of some kind? And why he hasn't addressed it is because, did you see the way he danced? Do you really think he made an intentional political statement right in the middle of this? Now, if you're a Democrat, it's the best thing to attack. The problem is they're attacking that while he's getting the things he wants done. And that's the same thing going back to the Department of Governmental Efficiency. So you don't always think of like people, I think the system that the world always thinks of, and I've worked, on political campaigns within the White House, within governors, within Congress and Senate. And when you start to realize like how the system is run, it is run on stats, on polls. And you realize that true beliefs of different politicians aren't the same. Now we're seeing that authenticity wins out. And we're going to see a new thing where Trump 4 years ago on Spiral Dynamics was much, much lower than he is now. If you look at his team, the real approach that I think won the election is the fact that he invited Elon, Vivek, JD, RFK. RFK was the linchpin. Who could say make America healthy again was not right. You realize that we're going to do the same policies and head down the same road, or we're going to have change, do things for our children better. Now, is everything going to happen in the right way for everyone? No. No one should agree with everything anyone does. There's being enough things, and there'll be enough losses and wins within all the different policies that are put forward in the current administration, but we're going to see massive amount of change that ultimately some of it will be pulled back. And if they pull that change too far, I talk about the rubber band, it's going to swing back the other way. So in essence, when you think of politics, politicians that play extremes, they generally actually help the other side more than they help theirs. So it's figuring out if 80% of people are in the middle, you got to figure out, how do I solve their problem? And that's what Trump did in the last few months going up to his election to win that election, as much as Kamala did not, or Biden did before that.
Yeah, it's all strategy. I didn't know that about Elon Musk, about the school, about him teaching you how to be anti-fragile and using the hate and using everything around you as fuel.
Well, I think that's when you think about anti-fragility, is it's the idea that things bounce off of you. It's the things that I look at my own journey, and I've shared this story in my book, Exponential Theory. I had a teacher that told me I would amount to, she was an English teacher, told me I'd amount to nothing. I never write anything. It took me 30 years to channel that. So, but I channeled it into a best-selling book. And she gave me an F. I had to go to summer school. So I flunked in high school. I graduated in the bottom half of my class. I was largely probably just frustrated and bored. Went on to college and got straight A's, got a soccer scholarship and did that. But that woman, as the anti-fragility, is I took that pain and I literally made that my success. And I put her as a dedication in my book. She's passed away since, but she has to know, even though she did something that every teacher should never do, is she said in front of the whole class, you're going to amount to nothing. I made sure that I was going to amount to something. Other people may just believe that and that become part of their value system. For me, it was the anti-fragility. It was that life doesn't happen to me, it happens for me. Meaning that everything that happens, it's not good or bad. It's just what I decided to be. So when you get into a boardroom and you have a bunch of people arguing about something and you frame it up this way, you realize you change their mind. You realize that they all start to think like, oh, okay, this negative thing that happened to the company is the rubber band that you needed to snap back so that you get back on track. There's signs everywhere if you're conscious of the path you should be on. And we got to get back from overthinking, because we think we can think our way out of it. Einstein said, you cannot solve the same problems by thinking in the same ways, because you got to get to your heart. You got to get to your gut. And that's connected to spirituality. That's connected to the superconscious.
Of course.
Subconscious, unconscious, superconscious.
Yep.
Once you're connected there, then you know you're head of the right. Then you can be anti-fragile. Then you can be authentically confident and understand you can never, and this is where social media is a funny thing, and I know Brady will understand this very well, is if everybody loves you, you're not going to go anywhere. You actually have to have a percentage of people. They're the ones that give you the fuel. Just as I say this, if you really think about this, the people that are the detractors give you the fuel to be successful, because they create the 1,000 true fans to fight for you, and they create your virality. Mm-hmm. So when there's people that absolutely despise you, you become very, very successful. So you have to have a stand that maybe is not in the middle, the exact middle, but it has to be somewhere that you take people somewhere from where they are. They have to be willing to actually change your point of view. When they do, then you own their mind share. And part of my goal in that, of knowing that and knowing how the world works and politics and all these different things, is to help people think bigger about themselves, because they'll make a bigger impact on everyone around them. It's what exponential theory is about. It's about thinking bigger about the planet, about ourselves, about our relationships, about the people around us, about the companies that we spend time with.
So what are you doing in your own personal brand and businesses that create that pendulum? I mean, you just said, hey, listen, when you find those haters, when you find those people that are pushing against a idea, a vision, a belief system, that then helps your 1,000 true fans come out and push against that. What has that been for you?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at my, and they're not literally political views, like this is just like stating facts within a system, is if we educate people about this, then you'll realize that you can think bigger within a system that's flexible, and you have flexibility. We all think that we're destined to where we are, but all I'm doing is unboxing the box that you live in that creates the limitations. And the unboxing is, How do I help you just slowly vibrate at a higher level? You can take quantum jumps and jump higher and higher and higher, and you often have setbacks. And it's why we talked earlier, there's people that can make $1 billion, lose it all, and make $1 billion again. And the reason is they understand the frequencies and what they had to do. They have the network, they have the knowledge, they have the know-how to be able to put that frequency in place. And I really boil it down to the science, because if you realize that if everything vibrates, and we know that we can put a vibrational to everything, and even our sleep vibrates, right? The way we measure sleep is in vibration. Deep sleep, REM, those things. My effectiveness of my mind is to actually have those states in the best ability I can possible. It doesn't mean I need to sleep 8 hours. For me, it's 6. For you, it might be 9, or for someone else. But for you, you have a certain amount of anti-fragility in your way to find the optimized way you do that. When you start getting authentically confident about how you work, because you've actually thought and challenged your own system, because you are a system that then works in other systems. And when you cross those systems, you have to learn that, how is that other system impacting me? And that's where when I walk into a boardroom, I realize you got 15 people that are from a bunch of different systems. They might not know this system. I might know it more than them, only because I've thought about their system. They haven't ever thought about that as a system. But when I bring them together and I start having them think about it as a system, that they are a system, then they start learning they got to play together. It's kind of like the idea, I used to consult with an organization called Chaos Pilot in Denmark and another one, Hyper Island in Sweden. And when I did that, they did things like, if I just brought Legos out and I took literally a board of directors and I said, hey, give me the future of your organization. And all of a sudden they'd start building up. Within a few minutes, they'd start actually collaborating and they'd start playing together. And in my book, I talk a little bit about this. There's 2 things. The first thing is NASA back in 1968 said, how do we hire more geniuses? And this is an interesting thing for people. When people were 5 years old, they found out, they went to measure them under this one genius scale. They found out that 98% of the kids represented genius at 5 years old. Why? Because they had no limitations. They were creative. They could be a rocket scientist or a rock star today. It didn't really matter. They didn't have constraints. Throughout time, as they got older, they realized by the time they're 18, they were at 5%, and then the time they're 25, they're at 2%. So we literally educate the genius out of people because we say stop playing or stop thinking big or stop doing these different things. Now apply this to this Lego thing that I'm saying. You get a group of people together and you say, build me something that represents what you want to do. They start getting creative and thinking and doing all this. And that is the measurement of creativity. We always say, people bring me in and say, how do you make my company more creative? Well, you get people inspired to actually think like a kid again. We grow up and we think we are all sophisticated and important, and we have these titles and all these constraints. They're just constraints. I'm the same Aaron Bear that I was when 5 years old, and the decisions I made then and what people told me impact me today. And we know childhood trauma is probably the biggest limiter, because somewhere along the line someone said, you can't do that. Well, I am at a point in my life seeking authentic confidence that I can do anything. Now, if I can instill that in anybody that listens to this podcast or any board that I engage with or any company that I help, what I do know is when I come into a boardroom, I get tremendous impact and results, because all of a sudden people see themselves differently. They remember who they were and what they are, because they're not the suit they're in. They're not the car they drive or the house they have. They're the person that's in there that treats other people a certain way, treats their system, treats another system. So then you start boiling it down and it literally comes to this one extraordinary habit. Now you got something that's pretty cool to measure yourself against, and you only measure yourself against yourself. Social media has you comparing yourself against everybody. Guess what? There's always someone more authentically confident in every area of your life.
True. Well, Aaron, you have given us so much wisdom today. You have let us see like the importance of our frequency, the importance of being authentically ourselves and continuing to grow and move along that path, and really what it means to, think big. I have a feeling next time we talk again, you'll have your bestseller. I'm sure you'll raise $150 million. Like, I know this to be the case. And that was one of the things I took away from today, is that knowing, right? Because there's a difference between having the knowledge and having the knowing. And so to be able to say, I know that this is going to be that, there's a lot more confidence in this people you're speaking to, and more importantly, speaking to yourself. So I really appreciate you coming out, man.
Well, and just to finish on that, it is speaking to yourself because you're the reflection of the world you create.
Correct. Yeah, we're all mirrors of each other, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
all right, man. Well, thank you so much,
Well,
brother.
thank you.
Cheers.
Appreciate it.